This is Shamtoli Huck. I'm the editor of Law at the Margins. We're really excited to launch our Faith Justice series today with Rahsaan Hall and Victor Naro. Just a little bit about Law at the Margins, and I'm going to hand it over to Victor Naro, who will talk with Rahsaan today about embodied solidarity. It was particularly important to have this conversation today on the day of the inauguration of President Trump. We are going to be facing enormous amounts of vulnerabilities in our communities across different sectors. We need to fight and work and stand together in solidarity. But solidarity is easier said than done. It's harder to engage in solidarity with each other when some of our interests oftentimes are in conflict. How can spiritual ethical practices help us to deepen our solidarity practices? What should that look like? This is what we're going to hear from Rahsaan and Victor today. So Law at the Margins is a dynamic platform bringing together lawyers, organizers, and activists who are committed to social change and social justice. So we don't have much time. We want to get right to the conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Victor. For those of you who are listening, if you have questions, please use the chat feature on the side, and I'll be chatting with you during the program. Again, special thanks to Rahsaan Hall, the director of the Racial Justice Program at ACLU, for joining us today, and also for writing a phenomenal piece of embodied solidarity, and to Victor Naro, who is a longtime immigrant rights activist, project director at UCLA Labor Center. So Victor, I'm gonna hand it over to you, and welcome to our first Faith Justice series.
Thank you, Shamtoli, and thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you especially, Rahsaan. I just want to begin. Can you tell us in a few just sentences how, because I know you're also a reverend, and so you do have a spiritual practice. How do you integrate your spirituality with your work at the ACLU?
Well, thank you, Victor and Shamtoli. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation, and to all those who are viewing, looking forward to the conversation. I think as far as my work at the ACLU of Massachusetts and how it intersects in my role as an ordained reverend, I look at it primarily through the context of how I live my life, the perspectives that I bring to the conversations internally, and the communities that I engage with or seek to get the office to engage with. And certainly being a member of clergy and being affiliated with different clergy organizing groups in the Massachusetts area creates some entree or points of entry for me. But I feel like the social justice thread that runs through my faith is something that allows space for conversation on issues that are dealing with people who are oppressed and disenfranchised. And the Christian ethos, I believe, is one that speaks to the liberation of the oppressed. And so I think that lines up very well with the work that I do as a civil rights attorney, also as a legislative advocate for the ACLU of Massachusetts.
Oh, thank you so much. So I want to jump into your piece along those lines. So you, it's a beautiful, and I encourage, if people haven't read it, it's a beautiful piece that you submitted, and this is the first submission for the Faith Justice Initiative. So it's a great way to start this initiative. It's a beautiful piece. But you base your connection between spirituality and social justice activism through a book, and I just want to show the book Just Mercy by Byron Stevenson, which is an awesome book, and if people haven't read that book, really it's a must read. But can you talk about, because the concept of proximity and how explain that more, how you took that concept from Byron's book and integrate it into your work?
Certainly. I think Stevenson's book is a phenomenal piece of literature and of American history. It tells a very compelling narrative about the role of lynching and slavery and oppression in this country, and how it is connected to the current criminal justice system, particularly death penalty work. And what he saw in his work as an advocate defending individuals who had been condemned to death by the state is that there were an overwhelming percentage of individuals who were Black, who were poor, and who were mentally ill, and also that women and children or young people were disproportionately dealt with in ways that were not appropriate. And in seeing these people's circumstances and the situations that they found themselves in, and whether or not they actually committed the crime, was there something within the justice system that justified the taking of life? And in all of his work, what he saw was this profound brokenness in humanity. And because of the brokenness in humanity, there's something that calls to us, or should call to us, like it called to him in doing this work, that should compel us to go beyond ourselves and the concerns that we have for our own selves, and look at what is needed in society. And so he talks about the role of being proximate to people who are suffering, and how that allows the individual, one, to not only have a connection with the person that breaks down barriers and breaks down walls and allows people to better serve and intercede on their behalf, but it also creates this sense of sameness, in that we may not have the same problems as someone else, but we still have problems, and that we are all, in some regard, broken. And it is because of that brokenness that is drawn out of the process and experience of being proximate, that we are compelled to help others. And I think that was something that was really powerful in his work. And so it's what has stuck with me lately. And I think for an advocacy organization and a lot of large nonprofits, we try to do all this altruistic work about helping people, but sometimes we miss the opportunities to see the commonality in our experience, and that plays out in some negative ways sometimes. You have a lot of organizations that are very top down, that are telling people, this is how we're going to save you, this is how we're going to help you, as opposed to creating more organic movements and ways of helping people that are genuine and sincere, and empower and allow people to exercise their agency in their own liberty.
Thank you. So for those of us joining us right now, welcome to Law at the Margins. This is the first of the series of the Faith Justice Initiative. My name is Victor Naro from the UCLA Labor Center in Los Angeles, but I'm also a proud board member of Law at the Margins. And I'm being joined by our first guest of this initiative, Rahsaan Hall, who heads up the criminal Racial Justice Initiative with the ACLU, and he's also a reverend. What church are you part of?
So I'm an ordained reverend in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I currently worship at St. Paul AME Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And thank you again for joining us and for being our first guest to launch this initiative. I now want to follow up on something you said about really brokenness, really allowing spaces for movements to become organic and flourish. The challenge I have is that there's a stress level involved, and there's also pressures on, we're always accustomed to meeting deadlines and objectives and deliverables, whether it be, through a legal litigation or legal advocacy work, whether it be policy or organizing. We all work under the concept of deadlines, never-ending work trying to meet deadlines. How is it that we can harmonize that with really finding this room for spirituality?
That's, you know, the intersection that exists between the secular and the spiritual is one that is always challenging. And I think we have to have our individual spiritual practices that exist in concert with our work. And so finding the time in our personal lives for devotion, for prayer, I think are always things that are important to do, but also finding the tenets of our faith tradition that should be the things that guide us. And so, you know, with deadlines, there really aren't things that we can do, I don't think, that will, I think it's our approach to those deadlines or our approach to the adversarial process that can be guided by our spiritual or faith practices and how we carry ourselves and how we respond to adversity in those situations. And that's how I've tried to look at it and how I've tried to deal with it.
Thank you. Now, in your piece, you do take the concept of proximity a bit further. You talk about embodied solidarity. Can you talk about that more?
Sure. I think, you know, this notion of solidarity is something that is very trendy right now, and you're seeing that in a lot of movements. People are organizing, and it's not anything. The concept in and of itself is not anything new, but through the advent of social media, I think a lot of people are able to talk about solidarity in a way that they haven't before. And you look at kind of intersectional feminism, and Black women were talking about all of these various identities that they have embodied, and the ability for women to have a more holistic, healthy experience is when all women across all sectors and all identities and men can be together in unity, advocating for one another or for them. And I think, so to that point, it's not a new concept, but social media, everybody is talking about solidarity, but it's easy to talk about it. It's easy to throw up the hashtag solidarity, but it's an entirely different thing to put yourself in the place of someone who is oppressed. I'll never forget a friend of mine who is a white woman who talked about solidarity, and she said, you know, I'm out rallying and protesting with folks on behalf of Black Lives Matter. And there came a point where there was a confrontation with police, and she recognized her own privilege of being perceived by the police as non-threatening while they were dealing with a friend of hers who was a Black woman. And she felt like, if I'm going to be in solidarity with this woman, I'm going to have to insert myself in this situation and use my privilege. And so she got into the fray with this woman and ended up being arrested in an act of civil disobedience. And I think those demonstrations of solidarity is taking it beyond the social media hashtag of solidarity, but actually embodying solidarity. And I think kind of one of the more prominent examples is Dr. Larisha Hawkins from Wheaton College, who donned job in solidarity with Muslim women. And so I think those are some of the things that we need to really talk about and be willing to engage in to really inform an authentic type of advocacy.
Thank you. Welcome, those of you who are joining in, welcome to Law at the Margins. This is the first of the Faith Justice Initiative. I'm Victor Nato with the UCLA Labor Center, and a proud board member of Law at the Margins, and I will be moving forward this initiative and inviting folks to really join and share your work with spirituality, your faith work, and how it intersects with your work for justice. And this is the beginning of an initiative that's going to continue, and there'll be many different ways to get involved. And I can at the end of this conversation, invite folks to join us for the future development of this initiative. We are joined with Rahsaan Hall from the ACLU, who's a great loyal activist. He also is a reverend, and he is talking about integrating his faith and spirituality with the work that he does for justice. If you haven't read his first, we launched the initiative with his piece on his work on integrating his spirituality with justice. And if you haven't read it, please take the time to read it. We're discussing that piece right now. It's a beautifully written piece, and we're very excited to begin this initiative with Rahsaan's participation and his contribution. So I want to talk about, you talked about privilege, and it's something that we all struggle with, especially the lawyers in the movement, but also it happens with other activists. I think the difference between, from my standpoint, 35 years ago when I started, 35 years ago I was actually a freshman in college. When I started the work of activism as a student to oppose Ronald Reagan and his, in his conservative crusade, I just see it different. The world of activism back then and the concept of how we deal with privilege is so different than today. I think, it's for many reasons. I think the work of activism has become, quote unquote, professionalized in many ways. Back in the days when I was a student activist, there were no nonprofits. There were very few. Activism was a choice, a life choice, which I found it easier than to integrate my spirituality with my activism, because there were two of my life choices merging together. Today is more difficult, and today we deal with privilege in many ways. I'll be the first to acknowledge that, as a legal activist in the movement, I do sometimes find myself abusing my privilege. But how can in your own framework, what's the best way, if you were to tell the participants, the listeners, how's the best way to approach dealing with those issues when your privilege becomes an obstacle?
I think that's a great question. And, one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is recognizing privileges. And so, for me, as someone who is engaged in advocacy work, in racial justice work, I talk a lot about white privilege. And it has taken some work for me to recognize the privilege that I have as a man. And not only recognizing, but actually speaking on it and working to value and lift up women and create space for women by taking a back seat or declining opportunities that have been afforded to me that could very well be afforded to women, and making things. So one, recognizing the privileges that we have and doing the work and educating ourselves to be aware of that. But then once we've recognized it, what is the actual work that we do to deconstruct that privilege, not only for ourselves, but within systems. When we are operating within these organizations and these nonprofits, what are our positions, and are we in places where we can speak on, not necessarily on behalf of people, but raise a level of awareness that there are voices that are missing, and that those voices should be prioritized and centered and lifted up and invited in. And so I think that is a lot of the work. And so while so many of us are so busy railing against the oppressor, for whoever we may perceive that to be, we have to be mindful that we are not in that same activity and advocacy oppressing others.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is Law in the Margins, our first Faith Justice Initiative a Facebook chat. We are with Rahsaan Hall from the ACLU, who's doing great work in the area of racial justice. And my name is Victor Nato from the UCLA Labor Center. I am a proud member of the board of directors of Law at the Margins, and we just launched this Faith Justice Initiative. And at the end of this conversation, I will invite, I will let everybody know how you can get involved. And then please, post questions and comments. We do have access to everybody who's listening in. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to post it, because we're gonna carve out time in the next few minutes to look at some of the questions and comments from participants. I want to make this as active and participatory as possible. So please feel free to ask any questions about this dialogue that we're having with Rahsaan Hall, or his piece that he submitted for Law at the Margins. And also, if you have questions of, thoughts or comments, we will welcome those as well, so we can integrate those into the dialogue. I think Rahsaan is trying to get back into the conversation. His piece is entitled "Embodied Solidarity and Proximities to the 5 Ps." And so in a few minutes, we're going to ask him about exactly those 5 Ps. His piece is also based on a book by Byron Stevenson, which is called Just Mercy. It's a New York Times bestseller, came out in 2014. It's really a must-read for not just lawyers, but anybody doing the work of activism, because he really does a good job of embracing his framework for spirituality into his work, advocating for people in the criminal justice system that really have been neglected and really have been sacrificed by the criminal justice system itself. And he's done great work, and now he's writing about it, talking about it, and encouraging others to do the same, to how really we can make the strong connection between spirituality, faith, and our work for justice. So we're trying to get Rahsaan back on. Let me talk about the Faith Justice Initiative while we wait for him to get back on. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I started really experiencing major physical, emotional, spiritual burnout in my work for justice. And I think I became addicted to the concept of burnout and the syndrome of really working until you can no longer work physically. And I think that's very entrenched in the work for justice. And I think it's a healthier way to do this kind of work. And I think Law at the Margins gave me a chance to really connect spirituality, faith with social justice activism, that then translates into our ability to take care of ourselves and take care of others. I have written about this in my book, Live in Peace, which there's a link to it. I can put a link to it, Law at the Margins. But the important thing is that it's not that we're doing the work less or less effective. It's we're doing the work in a healthier way, where we take care of ourselves, take care of each other. And I think that's provides a type of strength to the work of activism. I think it makes us better activists, and it makes the work a lot stronger and a lot more effective. So Rahsaan is back with us. Thank you so much. Now I can see you in action.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So I want to pose a question about, you do a great work about integrating the gospel, the teaching of the gospel, and the teachings of Jesus Christ, who I think was a peace, social justice activist, which I think you agree with me, into you connect his teachings with the work for justice. On the other side, the evangelical movement that has really worked hard to move the country to the right in many ways, and they have become one of the strong, supporters of, probably right now he's the new President Trump. They use the Bible. They use the Bible to promote crusades. They use the Bible, in my perspective, to promote hate, to promote acts of racism. But they're not doing it in the framework of the Bible. So they use the very same book that you use to integrate into your work as a faith activist, but also as a social justice activist. How do you address that? Because it comes from the same book itself. I just think that they use it, unfortunately, to promote the hate the racism, the injustices that we see today. But do you want to address that?
Sure. It's challenging, and it's very tricky, because within the faith there are a multiplicity of views and theologies, from very progressive to very conservative. And you've identified kind of the evangelical segment of the church that has used certain passages of scriptures and ideologies to promote ideas that have been very oppressive to certain groups of people. And so that is the challenge with a text that is thousands of years old and has been pulled together, and where you have a group of people within a faith tradition who run the gamut from believing that it is the inerrant word of God to an interpretive document or collection of poetry and historical documents. And so within that, you're going to have a variety of views. What I find most frustrating and challenging with the way that scripture has been used, particularly by those who have politicized it, is that there are a set of scriptures that they choose to use and focus on for political motivations. And so you look at what we call the clobber scriptures that are traditionally used to speak against homosexuality. Some of Leviticus texts, the purity scriptures. There are a whole host of declarations within Leviticus that we do not even follow to this day, but for reasons of politics and theological interpretation, people tend to stick to those passages of scripture. Yet we wear blended material suits, which is something that was prohibited, or that when women are on their menstrual cycle, they were supposed to be out of the house, and in some instances out of the village. But we don't condemn that, because as times have changed, our understandings have changed, what the women's role in the church is. And, that is something that a lot of churches don't take issue with. But if you were a more Bible believing church, that would be something that people would take issue with. But, in some instances, folks like to talk about cafeteria Christians, right? Where you go through and select the different dishes that you want, or you go through and select the different passages of scripture that you want. And, people have the same criticism of those of us who are progressive in our faith. So I think one of the prevailing themes, coming from 1 Corinthians 13, now by faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And if that is the dominant narrative and theme and principle that guides the actions of your faith efforts and initiatives, that is what's going to be the principle that allows us to reconcile scripture in a way that is promoting love and care for our neighbor, and not allowing us to use scripture as a platform for hate and oppression of others. There are ample scriptures that talk about the disdain for the wealthy and how they should not be lauded and lifted up. But yet nobody uses that in a political sense to condemn the 1%, right? It's activists who are saying we are the 99%, but where is the Christian community saying, yes, we are the 99%, and as ordained by God's word, we have the obligation to speak truth to power and challenge the wealthy rulers who treat the poor in an unjust way.
Thank you so much. My next question is about faith traditions in general. In my spirituality work, I'm a strong follower of Francis of Assisi, who's the peace activist from 800 years ago, and his teachings, more, his way of life before he became a saint, which resonates with me more than, the Catholic Church's interpretation of him and his teachings, because I think he was a peace activist who was trying to fight social justice 800 years ago. I connect that with the Buddhist teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's the peace activist from Vietnam. and I try to evolve those two into a spirituality framework that works for me. I bring this up because I run across many different faith traditions and spiritualities, especially in Los Angeles, which is a very diverse city, not just ethnically and cultural and ethnic backgrounds, but also religious and faith tradition backgrounds. What's your message for people from different faith traditions who are outside of the Christian teachings? How is what you're telling us can connect to them, knowing that they come from a different framework of spirituality and faith?
Right. I think it's from what I know, from a very limited sense, from either friends or what I've casually learned, is that all of the various faith traditions that I am aware of and familiar with have this prevailing notion of service and of humility. And if those are guiding principles within the faith tradition, service to others, whatever we can do to not think too highly of ourselves, and that our experience and presence here on this planet is much better when we are at the service of the rest of humanity, and particularly those who are less fortunate, the least of society. I am sure that that theme runs through most faith traditions, and if that is a principle that we can latch ourselves onto in our work, in our relationships, in our advocacy, that we're going to be better off. Anytime that we can align ourselves on the side of those who society has disregarded, we're bound to be better off.
Thank you. So the title of your piece is Embodied Solidarity and Proximity to the 5 Ps. Can you talk about what are those 5 Ps that you refer to?
Yeah, one of the things that comes out of the Black church tradition in preaching is alliteration, and so when you can have a series of topics or points that either rhyme or have the same letter, it's helpful. But more substantively, I think it is important to look at who these people that make up the P's are, and they are the least of these in society. And so first we have poor people, then there are prisoners, protesters, prostitutes, and people, but specifically oppressed people. And so in my piece, I kind of walk through some of the struggles that exist for those for folks that make up those populations, but also, what is a Christian principle that informs or instructs us to be in service of those people, of people in communities, and how do we do that in a way that embodies solidarity with them? If we are folks who are legal services attorneys, if they are working with poor people, it's a very good thing to have altruistic notions of helping the poor. But what informs your opinion of how you perceive their circumstances? Do you feel like they are poor because they are lazy, or do you understand the structural barriers that create poverty and allow or prohibit them from getting out of poverty? And some people certainly have come from poverty, and they know the experience of being poor and what types of decisions people have to make, and the very tenuous nature of living in poverty, how the slightest thing can put your whole world out of order. And so I think it's not until we spend time in the places and in the situations with people who are poor and make significant financial sacrifices ourselves that it's not until we do that we begin to have a greater appreciation and again that sense of brokenness that comes out because we are in solidarity with folks. Prisoners certainly in America, where we have 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the prison population, and gross racial disparities within that, it's important for us to look at, being there for people who, 95% of people who are incarcerated are ultimately going to return. And so what are we doing to create an environment where people are going to be embraced and upheld, and also create an environment where there won't be so many prisoners? And so talking to folks and being, writing letters to people, visiting people, putting money on people's books, or, bailing people out so that they're not in prison or in jail, because an overwhelming percentage of people who plead guilty are, poor people and people who are held on bail. So that's something that needs to be looked at. Protesters, with all of the protests that are happening, this notion of liking what people stand for, but not liking their methods. I'll never forget that the quote of Dr. King, who said, "Riots are the voice of the unheard." And he went on to say that he could no more condemn their actions than he could condemn the pervasive conditions that, make them cry out. So I think we need to be in community and in relationship with the people who are protesting, and understand what it is they are protesting about. And it is, and we have to sometimes step outside of our issue area, right? I think one of the most profound examples of this notion of solidarity that I saw was in Standing Rock, in the No DAPL movement, and all of the people who had not been engaged in advocating on behalf of First Nation people, going to Standing Rock and providing support, and standing in line and putting themselves physically at risk for the sake of protecting water and protecting land. As far as prostitutes are concerned, I dealt with that in a way of looking at symbolically, as a way of looking at the double standards that exist towards women in this society, but also the way that society recoils at the notion of women who exercise their own agency. And so that it is not only important to recognize those things, but again, for men, to recognize our privilege and to stand in solidarity with women, and to be the person that stops the bullying, or to be the person that sacrifices an opportunity for the sake of creating space. And then finally, the last P, for oppressed people. There are all types of oppression that people are experiencing. But what I've come to realize is that when people who are advocating for justice and advocating for liberation, when we align ourselves, ultimately we find that there is a common oppressor, and to the extent that there is not an individualized common oppressor, we can recognize and appreciate the similarities between the maladies that afflict us, and learn from one another to be better equipped to fight our battles.
Okay, now I want to see if I can bring in Shamtoli. Shamtoli, we're going to invite her to join us, and Shamtoli Hook.
Hi, thank you.
Hi,
Yes.
Welcome, Shamtoli.
So first of all, I have just been thoroughly enjoying this conversation with Victor and Rahsaan. And one of the things I just want to acknowledge in the chat feature is that we do have a number of supporters of Law at the Margins. And I apologize if you haven't sort of introduced yourselves, if I'm forgiveness of not mentioning, but I do see Suzanne Adderley, who is a labor contributor and has been doing a lot of work around boycott and divestment, using sort of the movement around South Africa in support of Palestinian rights and anti-war labor issues. Val Merlina from Pittsburgh, who has been an intern with Law at the Margins, and again, integrating faith practices around labor solidarity. And also see Gaia from Somerville from Groundwork, and using sort of faith traditions around agriculture and our nature and our economy. So I think that there are just multiple faith traditions that bring us to this common humanity that Rahsaan had talked about in the beginning. And so I just want to underscore this, that while we're coming from it from different issues, we do sort of converge around certain core principles and certain ideas. And so I wanted to actually ask Rahsaan about this. I think sometimes we sort of get stuck into our particular texts and structures and our issues that it's hard for us to get past it. And when you talk about faith or Christianity, people are like, wait, hold on, stop proselytizing. As a Muslim, sometimes I'm told to stop, with this religion piece. How can we communicate some of these principles to a broader section of our social justice peers who, to be quite honest with you, I feel are all faith justice folks? Because when you look at the reality, it's really horrific, but we hope, we inspire. So if you can speak a little bit to how we can kind of communicate our message broadly. And then the second question I had is, it struck me that you come out of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and your reading of the scripture is very different, and how race plays a role in that. And this is similar to the Muslim community. Black Muslims in the United States have a very particular view of Islam, which is counter-elitist and counter-white supremacist, in a way that sometimes even my own community isn't, who's Muslim. So I'm just wondering how much race, proximity to the oppression gives you that sort of point of view that's different. So I know these are big questions, but I just want to, your thoughts on my mind, that it's not a surprise that you, being African American in this African tradition, African church tradition, have this view, which is different interpretation. So I'll just stop with that. And then again, I encourage folks to post comments, and I'm going to go off here so I can hear and be an audience.
I'll try to address Shamtoli's last question about spreading the faith. Okay, you can hear me. So as far as spreading our faith is concerned, without coming across as proselytizing and preaching to people, I think it's through our lived example. And I think that's something that's really important and overlooked. I have to acknowledge my father, David Hall, who, in addition to being my father, is someone where I got a lot of these ideas from. He authored a book called The Spiritual Revitalization of the Legal Profession, a search for sacred rivers, and really looking at how lawyers can change the practice of law based on our spiritual traditions, and how that informs our behavior, but also informs our interpretation and advocacy around the law. And the law is not a static thing. Laws have changed because of advocacy that has pushed to have laws interpreted differently in light of the different contexts that we live in. There was a period of time where the concept of equal marriage was something that was not considered as a viable argument before the court. And to a large degree, the legal arguments didn't change that much over the last 40 years. But what did change was society's understanding. And I think as advocates from various faith traditions, we have a role to play in crafting the arguments and lifting up the societal elements of what goes into our legal arguments. So I think that's something that is very important for us to do as people of faith, from whatever our faith tradition is. In regards to the distinctions between interpretation of religious text, Shamtoli, as you mentioned, I come out of the the Black church tradition, and not that all of the Black churches are the same, but certainly there's this idea of Black liberation theology, and James Cone, who was one of the preeminent authors in this field, really talked about this notion of God being on the side of the oppressed, and the ability of Black people to align ourselves with the liberation story of the children of Israel, and finding hope and finding favor from God within that. And so, we look at it from a more egalitarian perspective, but also one, the salvific nature of Christ, in one sense, has been one that is filled with hope for the afterlife, but also been inspirational for people in the midst of struggle to have hope that their current conditions, in light of what God has done in the past, that there is hope that there will be a better tomorrow. And I think that is something that drives and informs, certainly my interpretation, but also a lot of the preaching and the religious practices that are found in the Black church. And so I think, again, kind of going back to your earlier question, it's incumbent upon all of us that we bring from our faith traditions to this practice something that is centered and rooted in love and kindness, in the shared humanity, humility of self, recognizing that we aren't that great in the grand scheme of humanity and in the grand scheme of the divine. So hopefully that answers your question. I know there's probably only a few minutes left. I don't see Victor, and I'm not sure if there are other questions.
One of the things that I do want to just close with is that the idea of a theology that you mentioned actually is in different faith traditions. Also from the Muslim faith tradition, there's also a kind of concept of liberation theology. And so I think that might be a place of convergence, and to look at how all of the texts that when you interpret it through the lens that you said does bring us to a particular commonality. We are kind of want to close at 1 o'clock. And so just want to do a couple of thanks. But since you did mention your father and mentor, Dean David Hall, I do have to also want to acknowledge him because he was the dean at Northeastern Law School when I was a student, was a research assistant for him. It's no surprise that the Faith Justice series at theMargins is because I was trained in that orientation, that we do have to bring the spirit, the sacred, ethics, whether it's secular or religious, wherever motivates you internally to move us towards justice. So I really want to thank him. Thank you, Rahsaan, today for launching our Faith Justice series. And for those of you who participated, to continue to join us as we engage on these questions. I do want to also give a particular thanks to Victor Naro. I don't know if he's if he's still sort of in the internet universe. He's been instrumental in getting theMargins to this place to really reflect critically on these questions. And then finally to Albert Garcia, who is our tech producer and sort of helping us figure out this platform. I wish that we can connect in person, but without that, at least we can at least connect together on this platform. So I do want to give Rahsaan, we are still have you, just maybe some closing meditation thoughts. You are, after all, a preacher, to inspire us as we have to struggle and move for the next years to come, and particularly today. So I don't know if we have Rahsaan to maybe give us some closing words of thoughts and inspiration, and then we'll sign off, and thanks to all who joined us.
Sure. So I'm still here as far as I can tell. And so thank you again, Shamtoli and Victor and Elbert, for this opportunity to share and talk more about the piece that I wrote, and also kind of my own faith experience and advocacy and work. I think going forward, we have to be ever mindful of our obligation and responsibility to be concerned for the least of these, the least of society, the least of humanity, the people who have been left out, who are at the margins. And it is when we are in the margins with those people, in solidarity with them, that we are doing the most unto the divine, that we are doing the most unto all of humanity. And so I think that should be our charge as we move forward, that we should be that we should continue to be inspired and motivated to resist oppression, to be in solidarity with the least of these, and to fight and to have hope that our work together is what will allow us to prevail and to succeed.
Great. Thank you. With that, signing off, and see you on the streets, wherever. We do have to do this together. So take care.
All right, take care.